Thank you very much for coming. My name is Hee-jin Lee. I am the president of the KAIDE, Korea Association of International Cooperation. And we just 3 minutes passed, but we will start now. And those who sit further, please come forward. Once you come in, you cannot get out. So you do better sit in front. Right. Thank you very much for joining us in this session, which is the COICA and the KAIDE joint session. The theme of this this session is Asian Cooperation Network and the Korea International Development Cooperation. We have 3 distinguished academics from China, Japan, and Korea. And most all this event is sponsored by the jointly happened, but we are supported by the COICA. So we have today the vice president of COICA. So let me briefly introduce 3 speakers. The first speaker. Professor Ito Sanae from Nagoya University, and Professor Kim Tae-gyun from Seoul National University, and Dr. Tian-Hui Fang from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Then we have 2 discussants, Dr. Kim Sung-gyu from Seoul National University Asia Center, and Moon Kyung-yeon from Jeonbuk University. Right. So we are quite tight in making time. So we will start. So let me briefly introduce the Dr. Woo Yong-jung. He is the Vice President of Korea International Cooperation Agency. He is now in charge of socio-economic development, dealing with the socio-economic department, procurement department, and the other key activities of COICA. He has been he worked as a country director at COICA's overseas offices like Vietnam, Egypt, and Paraguay. He has diverse experiences in international cooperation. So, and he studied public administration and international development at Bradford University, United Kingdom. Please joining me welcoming Dr. Jung.
Good afternoon, everyone. Professor Lee Hee-jin, President of Korea Association of International Development Cooperation, in short, KAIDE, and Professor Sanae Ito of Nagoya University in Japan, and Dr. Tian-Hui Fang of Chinese Academy of Social Science, and Professor Kim Tae-gyun of Seoul National University, presenters, discussant, and ladies and gentlemen. May I take this opportunity to welcome all of you here to a very special session on the ASEAN Cooperation Network and the Korean International Development held as part of the Jeju Forum this year. And also it's my great pleasure for COICA to host this session with the KAIDE to discuss how we work together to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal and to tackle the challenge, particularly through development financing. I think all of you know the SDG, which are comprised of 17 goals, which involve broad and comprehensive tasks, including the poverty, inequality, health and education, and inclusive growth, climate change, and so on. So international communities have strong motivation to implement the SDG so that they are well aware of the importance of developed finance as means of implementation. In this regard, the third international conference on financing for development was held ahead of SDG launching and announced the Addis Ababa Action Agenda as an outcome document to urge the implementation of financing the SDGs. SDGs require a huge amount of financial resources, and the global communities need to mobilize $2.5 trillion per year in filling the gap to achieve them. The traditional ODA, Official Development Assistance, is a critical resource to contribute to this goal, but it cannot alone meet the demands of the resources for development fundamentally. Therefore, there is a broad consensus on the needs for connection and the linkage between ODA and the resources from other sectors to cover the challenge confronting. ODA can definitely play a catalytic role to mobilize other development finance, such as private institutional investment, remittance, and tax, FDI, and so on. Inclusive and transformative partnership is also another key to fulfill these multidimensional goals and improve development effectiveness. In the development circle and the debate around effectiveness, donor and other actors increasingly realize that all the approach and the perspective different stakeholders take must be complemented each other in order to create a more effective development environment. We will notice that integrated and collective effort from the donor and the partner countries, international communities, and the governments and the private sector are essential than ever before. It is challenging but also important to have common goal set to achieve inclusive and sustainable development representing SDGs. We need to find innovative way to collaborate to achieve SDG, from mobilizing of financial resources to working with other players, including ourselves, foundations, and the civil societies. For that, we need to redesign and conduct our work in a very transformative and positive spirit of cooperation. As Korea's leading grant agency, the KOICA, is seeking to strengthen a partnership with various actors, especially with our neighboring countries, to keep pace with the global trend in the development cooperation. Therefore, I'm very glad to have three experts from Korea, Japan, and China here, and this session will provide an effort for the momentum leading to our future cooperation. And I hope that today's discussion can contribute to uplifting awareness of the importance of a partnership in the SDG era and to deepening a new insight of the innovation and the transformation in the development cooperation. Finally, I once again thank all of you who have participated in today's session, and I hope it will be a fruitful and meaningful time for all of you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jung. Before we start, let me briefly how we proceed. As you know, we have 19 minutes today, and we 10 minutes already passed, so we are very tight. So we are going to have three presentations. Each takes 15 minutes. And when it reaches around the 30 minutes, I will make a... Then we have two discussants, each takes 5 minutes. Then after all the presentation and the discussions done, we are going to listen to the responses from the presenters, and then we will take some questions and comments from the floor. So, okay. The first presenter is Professor Ito Sanae. She's from the Graduate School of International Development at Nagoya University. She has over 30 years experience in development research and administration. Her major country expertise lies in Bangladesh and he worked in many institutes in Bangladesh. Her current research interests include development cooperation policies, shifting paradigm of development, which is related, and the financial inclusion in Asia, which is related to today's topic. Please, Professor Ito, come forward. Thank you.
Sorry, I was a bit late today. My watch was going late. Anyway, so I'd like to thank both Koika and Kaidek for inviting me to this session today. I feel very honored to speak in front of you. And my name is Sana Ito. I'm currently the Dean of the Graduate School of International Development in Japan. And I'm also a member of JASIT, the Japan Society for International Development. How should I, sorry, the slide should be, should I do the slide or? Oh, sorry. This is a rough outline of my talk. My main focus today is Japan's approaches to financing for development in the context of SDGs. And I'm going to argue that the shifting principles and priorities of Japan's development cooperation in the context of the SDGs run the risk of compromising on development outcomes for developing countries. Take a quick look at how the landscape of international development is changing. The most significant change, as you all know, is the entry of new actors in the field of development cooperation. As actors change, so do the norms, discourses, and actual practices. And some of the traditional DAC donors seem to be reconnecting their foreign aid with national interest, stretching the meaning of universality, which is the principle that underlies the SDGs, to mean that foreign aid could be diverted to financing donors' own development challenges simultaneously as it helps developing countries address their development needs. And emerging donors, on the other hand, use the language of solidarity, but probably both are arguably equally keen to link development cooperation with national, commercial, and geopolitical interest. And Japan and South Korea have always been uncomfortable within the rich Western donors club. And though I'm not quite sure about South Korean case, but Japan is definitely dithering between the two camps increasingly these days. Now, in the new era of international development, financing for development can take different forms. As low-income countries cross the threshold of middle-income countries, mobilization of domestic resources through taxation becomes very important. Also important is the view that public resources, such as foreign aid, should be used to harness the role of the private sector. Here, aid is seen not as the prime mover of development, but as a catalyst for mobilizing private resources. And in this context, the idea of public-private partnership in development cooperation becomes of crucial importance. Now, when public and private form partnerships for development, should that affect the purpose of development cooperation? It isn't supposed to do so, but what defines development cooperation anyway? There are 4 criteria, according to Alonso and Glenny. Development cooperation should aim explicitly to support national or international development priorities. Second, development cooperation should not be driven by profit. Third, development cooperation should discriminate in favor of developing countries. Fourth, it should be based on cooperative relationships that seek to enhance developing country ownership. But thinking about these criteria is important, is increasingly important, because in the era of the SDGs, the notion of development cooperation has been significantly broadened, and we are no longer sure what constitutes development cooperation and what doesn't. And the universality and unified nature of the SDGs makes it increasingly difficult to distinguish actions that can be classified as international development cooperation from a range of other actions necessary for the good of the planet or to meet domestic objectives. Here, let's look at the trends in Japan. Japan revised its ODA charter in 2015 to come up with a new development cooperation charter. Of course, this is in line with the international trends set by the fourth high-level forum on aid effectiveness held in Busan in 2011. The idea of aid as a catalyst for mobilizing a wide range of resources is clearly expressed in the new charter. And it is also clearly stated that that development cooperation is going to be reorganized strategically to address national interest. And this figure shows how Japan's Development Cooperation Charter views the domain of development cooperation and how ODA may be used here. Maybe the ODA may be used as a catalyst for encouraging Japanese private companies to participate in development cooperation. The government of Japan is trying to mainstream SDGs in its national policy making across different ministries. This is good in principle, but since the SDGs incorporate an extremely broad set of goals which are universally applicable to both rich and poor countries, so mainstreaming it in different policy areas runs the risk of Japan's ODA being used as a catalyst or an incentive, rather, for mobilizing a range of resources, public and private, for non-development purposes. For example, for the good of the planet or to meet Japan's domestic objectives. This becomes clearer if you look at SDGs 5 Ps and 8 priority areas Japan has identified with regard to SDGs. The priority areas reflect very broad coverage addressing needs not just of developing countries but of the Japanese needs, national objectives as well. Here let me raise 3 questions concerning Japan's financing approaches and their implications for development cooperation in view of the 4 criteria for development cooperation that I mentioned earlier. The first question is whether the inclusion of Japan's private sector as a recipient of Japanese ODA-related financial incentives blurs the distinction between developing countries' priorities and Japan's own priorities. The second is the question whether the notion of aid as a catalyst is interpreted to mean that it may be used to facilitate Japan's private sector investments, especially in the area of infrastructure development. The third is the question whether the shifting principles may lead to Japan's development cooperation being driven by profit after all. If you look more closely quickly at actual policy shifts, Japan's ODA allocation for infrastructure development in largely middle-income Asian countries has increased by 30% in 5 years. And different policy devices for ODA loans have been introduced to encourage Japanese companies to invest in infrastructure building projects in Asia. So here are the main points. I talked very quickly, but here are the main points I wish to make through this brief talk. First, there is nothing wrong with governments partnering with the private sector in development cooperation in order to enhance development effectiveness. Second, however, the use of public resources with a clear development mandate should not compromise on development outcomes in favor of profitability of the private sector investments. Now, donors talk about the win-win relationship, of course, wherein both donors and recipients benefit from development cooperation. However, if you look back on the history of development assistance, we know that donors' national, commercial, and political interests have often differed from those of recipient countries and their people. And history tells us that the conflicting interests have often proved to have discriminating effects against developing countries. And we are told nowadays that we have to move beyond the business as usual. But what is usual and what is not is becoming increasingly ambiguous. What used to be the business as usual in the 1960s and 70s now seem to be strongly revised, to be repackaged as something new. Perhaps I never imagined that I would be old enough to tell people that we must reflect on history, but now it seems like it's time for us all to reflect on the history of development and ask the kind of questions we used to ask in the 70s and 80s. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ito. Particularly, I thank you for setting a good model of a timekeeping presentation. Okay, so I think that it is really good to have a keeping time. Then we have the second presenter, the speaker, Professor Kim Tae-gyun. From Seoul National University. He's currently Associate Dean of the school, and as you see from his bio, he's doing diverse activities. He has diverse positions and doing a wide range of activities. He's called among our groups. He's an all-round player, which is demonstrated by. As you see, he has 2 PhDs, DPhil from Oxford and PhD from Johns Hopkins. My question for you at the discussion session will be, what's the difference between DPhil and the PhD? Okay, so please let me, Professor Kim Tae-gyun, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Tae-gyun Kim, as our president Kaida introduced. Right. Today, actually, just the update about the PPT file. So it's quite a different format from the handout. Today I'll talk about the different aspect of development financing or finance for development, especially after the Addis Ababa, the 3rd International Conference for the Development Financing back in 2015, July in Addis Ababa. By focusing on the tax reform, so why the tax reform should be placed at the center of a whole scheme for our mission to especially develop the patterns or modalities of development financing for SDGs. So that's my key argument. Especially I'm going to use the Korean experiences, how Korean government utilize or sometimes modify the tax reform, tax administration to enhance the economic growth throughout the diversity of government expenditures as well as the designing power. So there are two, I think, the points. So first of all, I'm going to review some of the current development paradigm or landscape, especially financial, the support for the SDG achievement, and then I'm going to criticize, I think already the Ito sensei, criticized a little bit about some profitable, I think, the aspect of global partnership, especially we're going to invite some of the private sector into the public kind of field for the ODA or the offshore development assistance. So then I'm going to criticize very harshly, and then I'm going to move to the current case to identify tax reform could be, I think, the main idea and the main solution mechanism to really help, the developing country out of poverty. Pointer. Okay, so this is the points of departure. I already talked about my key, departing points. So I'm going to review the FD, in short, I mean finance for development, especially Addis Ababa and SDG, and some of the schemes designed by some private sector engagement, and then taxation and state building. I think is fundamental factor for the finance for development. So I always argue, and then quicker, I think hopefully just put more weight or put more effort to develop some kind of good scheme to help the tax administration for developing countries. That's I think starting point for all the schemes for the development financing, and then how to secure the tax collection, and then as I said, the Korean case could be I think the good practice to be reviewed by developing countries for their own path for the development financing, and then the next step, as a conclusion, how three countries, I mean in Northeast Asia, that's the key direction for this session panel. So the China, Japan, Korea, how we can collaborate to support. In this presentation, by focusing on the tax reform for developing countries. Okay, so I think everyone knows the historical evolution of development financing. So from the Monterey Consensus back in 2002. So right after the MDG, announced by the UN General Assembly back in 2000. So there are some different modalities they suggested. So if you look at the first, that domestic sources of developing countries, the main tax reform, tax administration. So they make their own money for their own scheme for the development plan, right? Rather than just importing some of the food and the money from the outside. And secondly, in the mobilization of international sources, such as the ODA. So we can just keep saying the ODA. So ODA is very small part of the whole development cooperation. So in Korea, I think the ODA is kind of equitable to the international development. And FDI or other sources, we can just categorize as the international sources, and the aid for trade, and the financial technical cooperation, technical assistance, and the foreign debt, and then the other the patterns just proposed by the Monterey Consensus. And then the Doha round just followed back in 2008, and the almost same message with the Monterey Consensus. And then we just jumped to the Addis Ababa action agenda 2 years ago. So it is kind of preset for internet gathering, how to prepare especially money making for SDGs. So if you look at here, especially second point, the 7 major action agenda. That's the key components of the AAAA, Addis Ababa action agenda. So domestic public resources, domestic and international private business and finance, and international development cooperation, international trade as an engine for development, and debt sustainability, and addressing system issues, and science and accountability and technology kind of thing. So I think what is the main difference between Monterey Consensus and AAAA? I think the finance by business. I think the private sector. So it is open the door, open the room to the private companies. They can just engage with their own money. So I think the Ito-san already mentioned it's very, very critical how we can just utilize some of the private engagement by their own money in order to boost their own profit. So we have to control, we have to regulate. Otherwise, public sector, occupied by the ODA in previous decade, probably distorted by the private money. So that's why I'm going to highlight some critical approach to the Addis Ababa action agenda. And also the SDG, of course, we need huge budget, additionalities. So they highlight additionality by using the private sector, so private money. But how you can guarantee additionality is good for public, the interest, public purpose. So we don't know. And nobody can guarantee that. So that's why this tax initiative is launched by the AAA. It's kind of the new platform, how to develop the schemes and the form for, ultimate the responsibility, holders for development financing, especially to the tax reform. And then if you look at the next slide. Yeah, this is AAS kind of summarized. So as I said, the 7 different components, and then they just describe some and how the mobilized sources for the technology, infrastructure, social protection, health, and the SME, small medium enterprises, foreign aid, and other things. But you can just find the taxation is one of the components, very important, right? And they just launched, as I said, this tax initiative. And if you look at the goal 17 includes the global partnership, and then MOI, the means of implementations. It's very, very important, goal, how to support the other 16 goals as an implementation mechanism. So including the development financing and the other forms of the MOIs. So finance, technology, capacity building, trade, and system issues. So number one, finance also includes the domestic resource mobilization tax reform. So tax reform is always the top priority of the development financing. So they can make their own money. That's the top secrecy, as well as the development should be homegrown, right? We cannot support the forever, right? To provide aid towards the developing countries. So they have to find some kind of their own path for the development financing, as well as development plan. So that's why I just keep arguing, domestic resource mobilization should be seen as number one top priority for the developing countries. That is another shortcut to the enhanced ownership as well. So this is another map. So they map out the different forms of the financing so far we discussed. So the domestic resources includes the public taxation and private, the saving, and international resources, the public also, the ODA and OF, other office flows, and private, the sources like the FDI remittance. And then now in the UN is also the suggest the blended financing between the public and private money. So it's kind of blended by the public and also the private. And then the other one is the innovative finance. So I think that everyone knows you have to pay 1,000 won if you purchase the air ticket, solidarity tax. So if you buy the international air ticket in South Korea, automatically 1,000 won is withdrawn by the tax authorities. So this scheme is the existing format of development financing. And if you look at it down beyond the ODA, so the 2014 the OECD doc suggested new definition of ODA. That's TOSSD, the total support, official support for the sustainable development. So the boundaries of ODA is now blurred. Is expanded to include private sources and other philanthropies or other forms of sources now is counted as ODA. So this is, I think, another very dangerous move. So I fully understand we need the new sources because the ODA, the full budget of ODA across the different OECD traditional donors is quite limited and stagnant. It's not that the possible scenario to increase budget. So we need the alternative sources. But private source is a good candidate for the alternative. But we have to control, we have to regulate how to risk control. So that is the key, I think, the issue. If you really want to use the private money or TOSSD, whatever, blended financing. So some values of TOSSD is a new the definition suggested by the OECD doc. So I'm not gonna go into detail, but if you look at the values proposed by TOSSD and the type of support covered, if you look at on the right side, the consensual grants and loans, that's the existing. Now we're just using the loan and grants as key pattern modalities of the ODA. So of course there is the one type of the TOSSD and non-consensual loan also included, and PSI, private sector instruments such as equity guarantee and other things also included. And the PPPs, private-public partnership, and private finance mobilized are also included. And the humanitarian aid, of course, is included. And then the unclear areas now, TOSD hesitating to decide this is the ODM, TOSD or not. That's the export credits and other forms of very privatized finance schemes. So it's like the ongoing process is still debatable, but the top, the red, the categories are also agreed by the OECD member country as TOSD. Okay, so what kind of the risk we have to take if you just use the TOSSD? I think the first problem is no clear-cut additionality. So to what degree we have to make addition by using private money? And second, lack of accountability. Who's going to take accountability for the responsibility? So it is very, very difficult to hold any agents to be accountable for their activities. And third is the lack of ownership. So, private sector just go into the local market of the recipient countries, maybe distortional market. Of course, they have no any intention to, maximize their profit. It's kind of full sense of Samaritan. But in a market, local market of the recipient countries, I think automatically or naturally distorted by this the infusion of the prime money from the donor country, like advanced economy. And the next one, the excessive profit maximization. That's kind of, I think, the natural born. I think the nature of private sector and risks in the accumulated debts to the developed countries and tax avoidance via offshore financial centers and distortion of local markets. So those, I think the problematic symptoms that we have to assume if we take the private sector as key co-partner or multi-stakeholder for, the making kind of good scheme for the SDG achievement. So there's a short summary in the current paradigm shift, especially development financing and some of the very dangerous aspect of FFD, finance for development. Okay, so now move to the Korean case. So this is the some theoretical aspect why the domestic taxation is the very important, critical, especially key solution for development states in Northeast Asia. I think I'm going to jump up the theoretical parts by using the diagram. So on the top, taxation, on the bottom, the responsiveness of economy. So we are the taxpayer, and the government just asks us to pay something for the tax, and then we automatically have the right to claim something because we pay for something to tax authorities. So as a citizen, I can claim the benefit of the tax levies, and then the government should be take responsibility. So it is kind of democratic, kind of the transaction between the government and the citizens as taxpayer. So you can, of course, resist. I mean, I'm not going to pay my tax because I can believe the government. So because the low level of the transparency or the high level of the corruption. So it is a politicization about the levy and the taxation. So the government just keep on doing like the very clear, the picture of the taxation. So the tax could be the very transparent business project in the I think process of state building in developing countries. Okay, so on top of that, I can just touch on very briefly the Korean case. So Korea, of course, post-colonial period beyond the 1945, we just liberate from the Japanese colonial period. So the new government just tried to make some tax reform. It's kind of the very different path for how to take the levies from the citizens. So that's the first momentum how to reform the Korean tax reform procedures. And the second is the period of development state. So the 1960s and 70s, the golden age of very condensed way of the economic growth. So Park Chung-hee regime 1960s very smartly used the tax reform, how to support the especially chosen industries like development state. That's a typical pattern of the development state. So destroy the past tax law and construct a new taxation system for the economic growth. So it is fully and then very smartly customized to support the industrialization by using the tax kind of benefit. And the next one, if you look at the second point of the period of the development state, they established the national tax service in 1966 and tax reform in 1967. That's a very critical juncture, modernizing tax administration in South Korea. So many reforms they are conducted by the Park Chung-hee regime. So it's a modernizing process. Of course, if you look at the next, okay, 2 minutes, yes. Quite enough. So 1970s is Yushin. So the authoritarian regime is occurred by the some illegal presidential election by the Park Chung-hee, and he also manipulated tax reform to consolidate his political basis to continue his on the presidency. So tax administration is quite the logical outgrowth of government policies, government strategic, I think, the move. So the good governance or good government can, I think, lead to the good format of the tax reform and tax administration. And also the citizen can have some legitimate claim to get more benefit because I pay something for the tax. But otherwise, I think the very vicious circle is formed by the government. So there are some pros and cons of tax reform by using the South Korean case. I'm not going to highlight the very beautiful scenario of South Korean experiences in tax reform. Some bad aspect and good aspect, but I need to develop further after in the 1970s. So up to the Park Geun-hye regime, and then we can just describe the full photo of development of South Korean case. So conclusion. So strategic use of taxation as foreign aid. So I think that's my personal view. So maybe you have the different view, so you can just discuss after my presentation. So tax reform as a central tool for restoring the statehood in developing countries. So we have many different channels, right? The foreign aid or ODA or the export credit and equity, all different finance scheme we can mobilize to support the developing countries. But I think that among them, the tax reform or tax services should be at the center of statehood, state building for the developing countries. That is the very shortcut and best way to support the ownership-based development plan for the economic growth. And then the last point is I'm going to jump off the last point, the Korean way. This is the Korean way. So I don't want the Korean way as the, cure to different contexts of different countries. So how we can just collaborate the regional cooperation in Northeast Asia. So we all the time talk about the China, Japan, Korea need to collaborate. How? So I think the tax reform, the tax exploration for their own development, because China, Japan, Korea, that's the best cases for the development of state business. So we can share some of the commonality for the tax reform for state building. So we can just collect which one is good case or best practice in Northeast Asia, and then we can just work together and then maybe implement together to support the developing country for the tax reform. All right, so I'm going to stop here, and then thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and sorry for pushing you, but that's my job. Right, now we have the last speaker, Dr. Tian Hua Fang, Senior Research Fellow from Institute of World Economics and Politics, Chinese Academy of Social Science. And she has visited many world-leading research hubs in international development and has published a lot in leading journals. Her research expert includes green finance and circular economy. She did her PhD from Renmin University, China. Please join me welcoming her. And
thanks for the introduction of the chair and also the invitation for this forum. Actually, today my topic will focus on financing sustainable infrastructure. And I will take China as the example and see China's response and approach. And actually, sustainable infrastructure is a very important target under the SDGs. I see the SDG 9, and also I mark the others is sustainability and climate-related infrastructure. So there are lots of development financial source under the Abeba Action agenda. Actually, Kim has a lot of introduction about the developing finance source. So I leave this. Why infrastructure investments are very important? Actually, we know since the crisis of since the 2008 crisis, the infrastructure investment has been a driving force of global economic growth. Why it's important? Because it has lots of important effects. It has spillover effects and network effects, and also it has lots of forward linkage effect and backward linkage effect. And also there are growing needs for trans-regional connectivity requirements. Here I list some. For example, the GMS Economic Cooperation Program and the One Belt, One Road initiative. And also in Europe, they have the CEF program. And also in Africa and Latin America and South America, there are lots of Trans-Regional Connectivity Program. It has been initiated. In general, both the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and also the Paris Climate Agreement has required that building green, clean, and high-quality infrastructure in sustainable development goals. And there are lots of major initiatives as a response to climate change. So if we see the players in infrastructure investment, from the national side, the governments dominate. And government and the National Development Bank are the major investors in national infrastructure investment. And in cross-border infrastructure investment, we will see the multilateral and regional development banks and the International Finance Organization are the main player. And the MDBs not only share their funds, they also provide knowledge and technology, and also effectively coordinate between different parties. The private sector is also a very important part in infrastructure investment, but currently, actually, it's the percentage of their investment is sufficient. So what's the biggest challenge for the investment of infrastructure? Actually, we see the main challenge is the investment gap. If we see the World Bank's report, at least $1 trillion more as investment on a yearly basis will be needed until 2030. And 2020 and 2030, they have calculated that the amount as much as $50 trillion will be needed. And in terms of the report of GIH, that's the Global Infrastructure Hub set up in G20 process, by 2030, the investment gap will be had from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. So actually, the current global development financing architecture doesn't provide financial at a sufficient scale to meet infrastructure development needs. We see the circle that current annual spending, the government budget dominated. Then the private sector is a big part. It's a relatively bigger part. But the other developing country finance is very small. And ODA and also MDB finance is also very small. Especially the situation exists in the emerging market and the developing country. The second challenge facing the infrastructure investment is the risk. There are lots of risk in different process of infrastructure construction. There are lots of macroeconomic and political risk, also has technical risk, and also it has environmental and planning risk. The third challenge, I think there are lots of gaps. Here there are policy and institutional gaps. There are financing gaps, under sustainability gaps, and the project development gaps. Actually, all these gaps has relatively project costs, financing costs, and also sustainability costs. One cost cannot be covered, then it will form a vicious cycle. So, what's the solution for the situation? Actually, China, I will take China as an example to see China's approach and response. Actually, in these years, infrastructure investment in China is of great significance to the contribution of China's economic growth. This is the graph. It shows the trend of China's infrastructure investment since 2000 to 2025. I also list a table. It has shown that the infrastructure investment has been a great increase since 2000 2000 year. And in China's 13th 5 years plan, China has proposed to more than 2,200 projects related to railway, highway, waterway, airport, and urban. And the total investment in this project will be 4.3 trillion RMB. And totally, they have different distribution across years. And this year, it will be 1.3 trillion, and next year will be 1.3 trillion. This is in the 13th 5 years plan. And China also are playing a positive role in foreign trade, foreign aid currently. This is a report from the white paper of China's foreign aid. This is the latest one. Actually, a lot of foreign trade has been flowed to the economic infrastructure. It's almost close to 40%, 50%. And also the 70 close to 30% has been flowed to the social infrastructure. And the most foreign aid has been flowed to Africa and also South Asia country. This is the business chart of China's foreign contracted projects from 2000 to 2015. We can show a very big change and a very big increase. And also China has proposed a lot of joint cross-border infrastructure connectivity plan. The first one actually is dominated by ADB, and China also a part. And the second is also dominated by ADB. And also we have the China-Pakistan economic corridor and Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor. We have One Belt and One Road initiative. China also proposed the APEC connectivity blueprint for 2015 to 2025. And China also proposed the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and Korea is also a member of this bank. What's the experience for China? Actually, I think here are very simple words. Rich technical experience in numerous overseas projects, especially in highway speed, railway, bridge, airports, seaports, and hydropower dams. But we also can see the challenge that for China's overseas investment. The first one is the international investment and trade protectionism. And also the second one is increasingly fierce competition, both from the developed country and also from developing country and the emerging economy like India and the others. And we also find that it is weak in financing and with limited financing channels. For China's investment, we also find most of them are shortage of expertise that is needed for international operation, and it has low level of localized management and the insufficient work related to social responsibility. So, what is China's attitude to this sustainable infrastructure investment? In China's 13th 5 years plan, it says China will enhance the cooperation with international financial institutions and expanding infrastructure coverage and promoting the infrastructure connectivity. Actually, this is quite similar as the proposed in last year's China's G20 summit. In last year's G20 summit, actually, infrastructure investment is the top issue in last year's G20 agenda. China proposed a global infrastructure connectivity islands initiative, and it has been approved in the G20 Hangzhou summit. And in last year, actually, for the infrastructure investment, three main topics has been discussed. The first one is optimizing the asset structure of MDBs and mobilize their resource. And the second is how to diversify the financing channel for infrastructure and especially leverage the private sector investment for infrastructure. And the third one is improving the interaction among existing initiatives for infrastructure connectivity, regionally and also in the bilateral side. They also have specific policy recommend from the business 20 side. They hope that G20 can increase a pipeline of bankable projects. Also to establish the favorable regulation rules or increasing the brands and depth of cooperation among MDBs and practicing area of joint finance and technology assistance. And also they propose to improve the productivity of infrastructure projects and also to set up, improve the national, regional, and global mechanisms to enhance the connectivity of infrastructure in various countries. In these proposals, actually, most recommended developed multilateral development banks should be play a catalytic role in infrastructure investment. Why? Because MDB has the ability to transform the investment opportunity into the real investment needs. And also they are well situated to address both the policy results and also management. They have the confidence and reduce risk, and they can bring relevant instruments and encourage participation of other resource, financial resource. And also it has an honest broker. And then also China, the multilateral development bank can mobilize and blend financing from different sources to create a viable financial package. And MDBs can also help to catalyze the change to make the infrastructure more sustainability. And also they can meet financial requirements on the score efficiently implies a significant operation and transformation in the role of MDBs. This is the infrastructure investment of different MDBs from 2004 to 2013. We see there are lots of, for some they are increased and for some they are not. But actually, I have shown in the graph in the other slides that the total percentage of MDB's investment actually is not very large; it's quite small. So it has a space to increase. And in last year, more than 11 multilateral development banks has their quantity commitment to infrastructure investment in last year's China's G20 summit. Actually, this is lots of implication for the new development banks, such as AIIB. It can tell the AIIB that the new development bank can make a direct contribution and can catalyze the change. The new development bank have to judge themselves by their transformation role at the country level and in improving the international financing framework. So it should emphasize the principle of sustainability, eco, social, and environment. And also it can be a power. And also the policy and operating practice must be placed premium on flexibility and nimbleness. And it can prepare to use an innovative and a wide range of instruments. And most importantly, it can be a platform to collaborate with other multilateral development banks, national development banks, and private sector and climate funds. So the there are also 3 dimensions of policy and finance can consider for the increase the infrastructure finance. And the first is to strengthen the investment framework that can help to deliver a concrete pipeline of visible and sustainable projects and reduce the transaction cost and attract the private sector. And secondly, the need to address the gaps in the availability and cost of long-term finance, both in the upfront and operating phase. And the third, it can stress the cooperation and technology development and deployment. Thank you, and comments will come.
As I announced, we will change some format. The presenters, please come forward, and the discussants, Kim and Moon. Right, as I said, we have 2 discussants. We will begin with Dr. Kim Sung-gyu. He's in Seoul National University Asia Center. He studied in Germany, and he worked for the KOICA, and he is now the executive director of the Korea Association of International Development Cooperation. And Dr. Moon, he is now in Jeonbuk University, Jimmy Carter School of International Studies. He worked for Exim Bank, and he is also very active in our association as the chairman of international affairs. So we are really very good at in timekeeping, but I'd like to take this tradition to you. So please keep 5 minutes each. So we have some audience. We needed to.
Okay, I'm Sung-gyu Kim, research fellow of Seoul National University Asia Center, and I'm very appreciated to take a discussion in this session. So it's not easy to make this discussion with this theme. I think with regard to financing for SDG, 3 fundamental questions have been raised. First thing is, can ODA be a mechanism to mobilize various private financing resources differ from the traditional public resources? Second question is, what is the purpose of mobilization? So why we're trying to mobilize the new resource? The third question is, how will be mobilization more effective? We have to answer the question for the discussion about financing for development. Today's presentations are very meaningful to try to answer these questions and to give a methodology and orientation about orientation in terms of the mobilization of private resources. I think it is very clear ODA can be a catalyst or is a majungmul in Korean to mobilize private sources. However, how to compensate for the investment of private sources is still discussed, I think, because the motivation of orientation of ODA and investing motivation of private resources may be fundamentally different. For example, private financing may require more predictability and stability of return on investment. Second point is, it is also necessary to discuss why the private sector should be mobilized, or what is the purpose of the mobilization. I believe with the mobilization, the scope and the scale of ODA business could be increased. These viewpoints are important, but the ODA should be discussed with more emphasis on the performance management of project and spread of good practice with a matching fund. A third point is the method and resource of mobilization. Is very diverse. In particular, the importance of taxation is emphasized in order to secure domestic development resources. However, it is still under debate, I think, on international leadership in terms of taxation standard and governance mechanism. At the Addis Ababa meeting, for example, a proposal by the developing countries to form an intergovernmental commission on tax issues under the UN are not accepted. Instead, the donor countries' proposal for strengthening and utilizing the International Cooperation Expert Committee on existing taxes were accepted. That means, in the end, that they are not yet caught with the problems such as tax avoidance of transnational cooperation. So that was my comment, and I have 2 or 3 questions. First of all is about Japan's ODA strategy and ST's implement strategies in terms of financing mobilization of private sectors. Let us introduce about that. Second point is about quality infrastructure investment related in shifting priority. What is different from the previous infrastructure investment project in Japan? Is this related to the strategy of new resources mobilization? The last question is related to the actor and accountability of development cooperation. Please, Professor Kim, please let us introduce any discussion about international standards and governance mechanism for taxation or tax reform. Thank you very much.
Very much. So, we'd better have your comment first. Then we will take the answers or responses.
Okay, great. This is Moon. Sorry for the late today. The flight delay and long shuttles to hotels, and I took taxi. Sorry for the delay. I really enjoyed 3 of these papers. Especially, it's my honor to discuss 3 papers written by outstanding scholars and researchers from China, Korea, and Japan. I would like to give each comment on the papers, and I would like to raise comments and the questions on the Professor Ito and Professor Kim and also Dr. Tian on your papers. I think that Professor Ito is provide us very overall the overview on the issue of financing for development, the background, and current discourse, and also adding based on the kinds of international trend on finance for development issues. She gave us internal issues of Japan, and then she said that it was very theoretical and academical, right? So, and also it gives overview on the global discourse on finance for development issues. And compared to Professor Ito's presentations, I really enjoyed Dr. Tian's paper focusing on Chinese case, especially China is a new emerging, actually it's emerging, very important donor in international development corporations. They are endeavor to incorporate norms and ideas and their role as one of our husband countries in international cooperation and international politics, more focus on the development and the infrastructure issues. So it's more focusing on Chinese case, and I was really enjoyed in that sense. It gave more detailed and most wanted information on what's going on inside the DPRK, what kinds of issue, DPRK, inside China, because one of my major DPRK, North Korea. What's going on inside North Korea, China on the issue of infrastructure development corporations, and finance for development issues. So I really enjoyed your papers, and Professor Kim also, I appreciate your paper, especially tax reform in Korea. I always believe that Korea tax reform is one of the successful case. Especially he linked the Korea's case with the discourse of finance would develop in international development corporations. In that sense, I really enjoyed, and I'm happy with. I'm here as a discussion. To Professor Ito, I would like to question. One thing is that you talked about the ODA as a catalyzer, right? And facilitating other private sectors participation or other different financing sources. And also you said that some changes in ODA discourse and ODA policies in traditional donor countries, including Japan. That is a combination of national interests and SDGs, right? Page number 18, you said, just briefly introduce the national interest and SDG, but not just Japan, Canada, right? Australia, and also the other some European countries become more conservative on the ODA allocations. They argued that some kinds of national interest, combination of national interest and ODA and SDGs, MDG, etc. So I'm just wondering what kinds of benefit by joining or linking the national interest and SDG goals, right? What kinds of problems we link the kinds of two different national interests and ODA. Before we focus on humanitarian mandate, we more focus on humanitarian issues and humanitarian discourse issues. But nowadays, the voice of national combination of national interest and SDG is increasing, right? So I would like to know that. About the case of Professor Kim, I would like to ask about that. You suggested kinds of collaborations among the China, Japan, Korea on the dissemination of this kind of Korea's case, tax reform cases, right, to targeting the Asian countries. What kinds of platform might be possible among the China, Korea, and Japan? For Korea, we have a typical, knowledge sharing form is KSP. It's not delivered quickly, delivered by the EDCF and the Minister of Finance. However, yes, I think that tax reform it can be one of the technical cooperation project, but from the quick or grant side, what kinds of platform might be possible? That is my practical questions. Last one is that it might be maybe critical for China, but just wondering, yes, you gave a lot of figures, tables on the evaluation of infrastructure demand and the role of China and the importance of AIIB. By the way, 2 weeks later in Jeju, there will be second AIIB summit will be happening here in Japan. But in Jeju, sorry. Well, about the issue, my question is that the harmonization, right, with other countries in terms of, you said in page number 45 about international responsibility, right? So China they have its own way, but it has a little bit different way. There are some gaps between discourse and principles supported by the international community for the last 50 years. So China has its own way, but how to harmonize the role of China with existing traditional donors? So what kinds of efforts are doing to China? How it might be possible to harmonize kinds of the global effort of China and international communities in international development cooperation? This is my the question.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful and insightful comments and questions. So who's going to be the first volunteer to reply to their questions or comments? Yes, yeah.
Thank you so much. Very good comments. I was talking very, very fast. It wasn't very clear. And the first question is about quality infrastructure. Now, from before, yes. Japan has always been keen on infrastructure development, but especially, and Japan used to tie its aid and using Japan's ODA to channel ODA to Japanese construction companies, and it was very severely criticized in the 1990s. And we generally shifted towards anti-aid. But nowadays, the trend suggests that it reminds us of the coming back of tied aid, because I don't know, it's difficult to say. Maybe technically it's not, but in many ways, Japanese government is using public resources to encourage Japan's small and medium-sized, big, medium, and small-sized companies, construction companies, encourage them to get involved in infrastructure development projects. And some of the JICA people privately are being alarmed by the low standards, low ethical and technical standards of these engineering construction companies getting into ODA projects. So now, in some ways, I see the coming back of the old kind of tight aid period of Japanese aid being spent to help small and medium and fledgling Japanese construction companies. Also, another good question about OD, whether this OD, the linking ODA to national interest is not just Japan, and it's a global trend. I agree completely. And it's a global trend, and it's somewhat alarming. But of course, national interest can mean many things, and there's some point in saying, I mean, we have always been actually linking ODA to national interest, whether government would admit it or not. But nowadays, it's very again, the question is whether aren't we seeing now national interest very narrowly being national commercial interest for the purpose of financing Japanese companies to invest abroad. I mean, infrastructure building itself is nothing wrong. I agree with our Chinese colleague that it's very good. But for the question is, who is it intended to benefit? Yes, there are many questions that there are many questions there. Infrastructure is kind of ideologically neutral, and it's generally better built than not. So it's difficult to criticize. But when the public finance is being flowing into Japanese commercial companies, there's something not quite right. That's the point I would like to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So then, Professor Kim, are you?
2 minutes?
You
okay.
Take your time.
Right. So just like the Ito, Professor Ito, responded. Thank you very much indeed for the very good, very helpful comments. Actually, I got the two questions, I think, from each commentator. First one, I think, what is the international standard of tax reform, especially in developed countries? I think you already mentioned back to the Addis Ababa, there is to launch this tax initiative, but the main driving force of that initiative is UK and US, I think, Germany, 4 countries in the West, and traditional donors, and then the initiative negate the more engagement from the developing countries. So I think the asymmetric, the power balance inside the initiative for the tax reform is still, I think, ongoing problem. And then fundamentally speaking, there are 2 different arguments from each side, developing country and developed countries. First one is SR, the shared responsibility. That's the keyword of the advanced economies throughout the Addis Ababa action agenda. So all the responsibility for the development should be shared by all nations throughout the SDGs. That's the main argument of developed countries. And how about the developing countries? CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility. So some things should be commonly dealt with by developing and developed countries altogether. But some parts should be provided by the developed countries as responsibility. So it's quite the fierce, like the fragmentation or the divided front of the argument, especially the development financing. So I think the tax initiative, tax reform is in the line of that fragmented front lines. And then I'm going to connect the Dr. Kim's, the comment to the Professor Moon comment as well. So how to harmonize, the China, Japan, Korea in East Asia, especially to collaborate the tax initiative, tax reform for developing countries. If you look at some regional bloc, regional basis, or the South-South cooperation, there are three major regional gatherings to provide some supportive idea for the tax reform to regional, the partner countries. So the East Asia, especially Asia Pacific, and then the Latin America and Africa, there are three major regional South-South cooperation platforms to support the tax reform. And then even OECD doc, they admit that not like the one-sided implementation from the north side to the south side to the support tax reform. That's not effective though. So they just try to use the regional support by using regional platform, as I said, Latin America and Africa, and then Asia Pacific in general. I just forgot the full name of those three different initiatives. And then we can make, why not, the East Asian initiative for tax administration and reform, because we can share, right, a very key foundation of developmental state. This is, as I highlight. And then we have very negative side of the ODA or foreign aid policies. For example, high level of loans, concessional loans, and very high tight aid, right? So many negative things we have. So I think this is a high time to look at the other side of the same coin of the development cooperation. So the grant-based, knowledge sharing, and what kind of the benefit, real benefit we can transfer. So I mean, by highlighting the ownership of the local government. So that's why the tax reform, the support, I think that's a starting point from the basis for the three countries collaboration. So that's the personal idea. So I don't know, maybe quicker. I mean, the Vice President Chung will make some.
Okay, so Dr. Tian.
Thanks for Kim's and Mo's comments. It's very useful, and also you provide lots of questions. Actually, Professor Kim has mentioned the quality infrastructure investment. I think this is a very important issue. But for this, we need to also consider what's the quality. What's the quality? It's not the best or the advanced infrastructure is the best for especially the developing country. So when we consider the quality, we need to consider the absorbability and also the capacity of the developing country. And we also need to connect the infrastructure investment with the social and environmental issue. And also we need to connect with the process of industrialization and also urbanization of these countries. So from this field, we can consider the best quality infrastructure went to different countries. And therefore, Professor Mo's comments and questions, I fully agree that there's a big problem for countries' coordination because different of interests. But how to coordinate the interests? I think we can consider. Let me take the AIB as the example. How to coordinate the interests? I think one is it should consider the principle and also high standard setting, right? It should be lots of common principle and a higher standard setting to guarantee the investment. And the second, it should be has a platform for experience sharing and also knowledge sharing. This is important for coordination and exchange of investment experience. The other way is policy coordination through different ways, like bilateral negotiation or regional negotiation or multilateral negotiation, and also under different platforms like G20, also the Asian Cooperation Forum, etc. And also the last one is we need to the actual project coordination, project cooperation, and in reality, then we can find the common interest and put the cooperation forward. Thank you.
Right. So we are doing it's just 2 minutes before 2:30. We did a very good job. Actually, I did a very good job, but I feel there are some members of the audience who are eager to make a comment or contribute. Yeah, Dr. Jung, please first.
The topic today is about the SDG, can be achieved by development financing. So the topic is very interesting. So some of the question goes to Professor Ito and Dr. Hui Fang. You mentioned the ODA as a catalyst for mobilizing private resources. So from the Korean case, particularly KOICA case, is true. So as you know, the traditional the project aid has been maintaining for large scale for long years, but recently in KOICA, the PPP scheme, private-public the partnership scheme, has been expanding very greatly because we believe in a situation of lacking of financial resources, as discussed in the DAC level, we need to mobilize private finance to fill the gap, okay, for the SDG. So we support the Korean young startup, the small and medium enterprise, to develop their own idea and the technology so as to contribute their product in developing countries. And also we support enterprise, private companies like Hyundai and Samsung to extend their CSV, sharing social shared value beyond the CSR activity, so as that we can provide the financial financial resources as well as technical expertise to the people in developing countries. So this is kind of the both win-win situation of the finance. And also we are going to expand the relations with very global fund, for example, Gates Foundation and other global global fund, etc., to give more to give the opportunity to intervene the more resources from the public. So we are going to expand this kind of scheme very much in the near future. So how about the situation in Japan? Because with Korea, within the Korean society, it is the right way to mobilize resources from the private sector. So I would like to listen the current situation of the Japan. This is really popular or are going to increase in the future or something. So the situation of even particularly JICA or other things. And then Dr. Hui-Peng, you may recall the South-South Cooperation, right? South-South Cooperation. It is the bond as an alternative arrangement from traditional North and the South financial flows. I think my question is very similar to the Professor Moon. So there are so much criticized from the public that the foreign aid has been not successful because of various reasons. So that's why Paris Declaration came out to support the aid effectiveness. For example, by untying of aid and those harmonization among the partners, and also raising ownership of the respective country. So we really expect a true philosophy of South-South cooperation as a truly alternative traditional North-South relations. So you mentioned in China, you focusing the investment, particularly the economic infrastructure project. I heard that particularly in African countries. So in the situation of the philosophy of South-South cooperation or some mutual the benefit. How going to China contribute using the money to support SDG, particularly as a kind of alternative mechanism of the traditional North-South solution? Thank you.
Right. So before we turn to the presenter, is there any? I will take a last comment or the question. So I am under pressure now from the administrative team behind. No? Okay, then let's listen to the presenters.
It's a very good point. Thank you very much, Dr. Kitun. And actually, I shouldn't be too cynical. And I'm sure there are a lot of positive dynamics also in Japan. And yes, but and also the responsibility is upon us who are specializing in development to share the value of development with the private sector. But having said so, there's sometimes I cannot help feeling that there's a lot of political rhetorics going on, especially our current Abe administration, and there's a very clear kind of motive to boost, help struggling Japanese economy by kind of misusing, channeling ODA into a kind of wrong direction. However, I do acknowledge that there are positive and some negative.
I think we can continue this conversation over the dinner. And Dr. Teng.
Thank you for your question. And since you mentioned the source cooperation, China's role, actually, I think in 2015, in the UN summit to promote the 2030 agenda, President Xi has delivered a speech and said China will build a source development fund to support the development of developing country. That's the development country. That's if I'm not wrong, is about $2 trillion. And this is one concrete form that China provides financial support, and also the others like debt reduction and technology support, and also trade improve the trade connection with the developing countries. Actually, maybe this is the traditional help of the source-to-source development, right? For currently, I think from my side, I think there's a lot of change about the financing the development, especially enhance the cooperation of source-to-source cooperation. The one is it's not only provide the aid to provide the money. It aims to increase the capacity of the developing country. For example, in last year's G20 summit, China proposed the industrialization of helped to improve the industrialization process of African country. I think this is a different way to enhance the source and to source cooperation. It helps to introduce their capacity of this developing country. This is much more important than just the aid help. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I wish we had more time, but we needed to finish now. And again, I really appreciate all those contributors who exchanged the productive and interesting and to some extent innovative ideas with all of us. And thank the audience for remaining to the end. So let's applause for all of us.